Last words, I'll keep it brief. My thanks, I think, in the name of the entire advisory board of the Minerva Center, to Eli, Michal, Itamar, Amnon, and all the others involved in the organization of this truly excellent conference, I think. Now, it seems that the conference speaks to the theme of the Minerva Center in a lot of different ways, in terms of which we are talking about the relationship between law and crisis. Now, we've heard today about how this is a political and moral crisis. We've heard firsthand accounts from journalists about the suffering in Ukraine itself. We've heard about Ukrainian children being deported, the destruction of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, and the impact that has, including for the broader global community with regards to food security. Diane Desierto has spoken about that today, and about the illegality of these aspects of the Russian aggression. Now, there is, however, at the same time, not just a political moral crisis, but a legal crisis. And that's what we've also been covering right today. So, for example, we wouldn't have to speak about neutrality and co-belligerence if the system that had been set up in 1945 was actually a working system. And the interesting thing is that we have, in this case, really a design flaw. So this is not something we've discovered in the last 10 years. The Uniting for Peace resolution is from 1950, so 5 years after that system's been started. And we've known all along it doesn't work that way. So there's the question, what are we going to do about that? And in some other cases, it's not so much design flaw that we've seen, but adaptation failures that we're seeing. So as situations have changed, we've been hearing about cyber war, for example. So there's a need to adapt the instruments that we do have to fit these changing circumstances. And then we've also heard, especially in the last panel, that, in some cases we have instruments, but it's really actually complicated. And Anwar made the point about the Russian student here at the university. So when it's complicated again, is our law sufficiently nuanced and complex to react to that? So I think this brings us back to a point mentioned in the first panel by Maria Baraki, and her reference to Hilary Charlesworth about the crisis being a time for international lawyers and how they thrive. And of course, coming from Charlesworth, this is a critical comment, right? She wants us to focus on the laws outside of the crisis as well. But the interesting thing that we also know from the literature is, both actually on a domestic and an international level, is that crisis is in many ways fundamental for the construction of modern states. There's just a recent book, again, affirming that sort of from a constitutional perspective. I have to actually look up the name, Saptarishi Bandyopadhyay, all as well, on how crisis shapes the emergence of modern states. And we've known that for a longer time, perhaps still from people like Anne Orford, Guy Sinclair, Claire, and others, how international law is typically growing and being expanded in terms of crisis. Now, the tricky questions relating to that, and Amnon has raised them, of course, is, so what are we going to do as we are going out of that crisis as well? In many cases, we see that the mechanisms adopted in terms of crisis are then just staying on. And often we don't actually particularly think about it, whether it's a good idea, they say, and we just sort of keep them, as it were. So I think the challenge is to take a more conscious decision and reflect on that, what is going to happen, but also, of course, as lawyers, we have to ask the question, what should be happening? Matthias Goldman says a new legal order. I guess we'll have to see about that. But I think you'll join me in expressing, once again, I'll stick with trust in Eli and the other PIs at the center in finding some answers to that question. But my thanks again for the wonderful